how I found a way to heal and reunite my family. I did a work program with a local clerk of court's office when I was in high school. They hired me when I graduated, and I had my 30 service years before I turned 50. With 30 service years, you can get your full pension at any age. I worked until my first grandchild was born. Then I retired to be grandma daycare. I have 5 grands, 8-year-old male from my stepson, 7-year-old male from my son, 5-year-old female, and an 18-month-old male from my daughter. I babysat all of them with no issues or complaints. I still keep the 18-month-old Monday through Friday, and I watch the older ones during summer and school holidays. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend have been non-stop drama since before their baby was even born. When she was 10 weeks pregnant, they presented me with a 3-page list of rules for when I babysat. They said if I didn't sign it, I wouldn't be allowed to babysit. I said I understood their need to do what was best for their baby, and I assured them there would be no hurt feelings on my end if they made other childcare arrangements. Some rules were almost understandable, but most were downright ridiculous. None of it was going to work for me. I don't remember them all, but some examples included: I couldn't take the baby anywhere without their permission. I couldn't watch more than one additional child while babysitting. I couldn't cook while babysitting. I had to provide the full name, date of birth, and address of any potential visitors for their approval. They had to know anytime I had a guest over and how long they'd stay, and my 9-year-old cat had to be kept out of rooms where the baby would be, even when the baby wasn't there. When she was 7 months along, they came back with revised rules in an attempt to compromise. Again, I let them know that their expectations were not going to fit my life and suggested they find other childcare. I thought that would be the end of it. 2 days after my stepdaughter went back to work, she called and asked if I could keep Cullen the next day. I agreed, but made it clear I would provide safe, appropriate care according to my judgment. I wouldn't deal with complaints or accusations about violating their rules. My stepdaughter said she understood. Initially, things were okay. She dropped off and picked up Cullen without much fuss. But over time, her boyfriend's behavior became unbearable. He'd make comments about the house, the cat, or even the other grandchildren. On Sundays, I started dreading the start of the week because I knew I'd have to deal with him. He'd partially undress Cullen, inspecting him like he thought I was mistreating him, and would say things like, "I guess we don't have any choice but to put up with this." This went on for 4 months. I spoke to my stepdaughter several times, telling her they clearly weren't happy with how I cared for Cullen. I encouraged them to find alternative childcare. Things would improve for a day or two, then the complaints would start again. Thanksgiving was the breaking point. Her boyfriend became very vocal about not wanting me to keep all my grandchildren over the holiday break. I made it clear I'd have all the kids for a couple of days and that they needed to make other arrangements if they had a problem with it. They didn't, and on the first day I had all the kids, he came to pick up Cullen and said, "I'm sorry you have to stay in this unsafe situation to be neglected." That night, I called my stepdaughter and told her she had 2 weeks to find other childcare. I told her she needed to handle drop-offs and pickups because if her boyfriend came again, I'd refuse to watch Cullen. For the remainder of the 2 weeks, things were better without him involved. Eventually, she asked if I could keep Cullen until January since their new provider couldn't start until then. I agreed. On New Year's Day, several friends sent me a screenshot of a post her boyfriend had made on social media. He wrote about how thankful he was that they finally didn't have to worry about Cullen's safety or neglect anymore. While he didn't name me, it was clear to anyone who knew us that he was referring to me. I decided I was done. When their new childcare provider didn't work out, my stepdaughter called and asked if I'd take Cullen again. I declined. My husband and stepson believe I should reconsider. They think her boyfriend is the primary problem, and if she handled drop-offs and pickups, everything would be fine. My stepson even suggested I might be more forgiving if this had been a conflict with my daughter's husband instead. Still, I can't ignore how deeply the whole situation has affected me. Despite their assurances, I keep reflecting on everything that happened. I think about all the mornings filled with tension and how much effort I've put into maintaining peace in the family. It's not just about Cullen anymore. It's about boundaries and respect. The years I spent caring for my other grandchildren were joyful and fulfilling. This experience, however, has left me drained. Sometimes I find myself wondering how things got to this point. My stepdaughter's insistence on control, her boyfriend's constant criticism, and my own unwillingness to bend have created a chasm that seems impossible to bridge. I've spent sleepless nights replaying their words and questioning if I've been too rigid or too soft. Yet, I also think about the other grandchildren who still fill my home with laughter and chaos. They remind me of why I chose this path in the first place. Cullen is part of that family too, and the thought of him caught in the middle is heartbreaking. Still, every time I consider saying yes, I'm reminded of the weight I've carried these past months and how much I've longed to find peace again. I can't help but feel the family dynamics shifting around me. Conversations with my husband are more tense. My stepson's words linger in my mind, but they don't erase the hurt. And my stepdaughter, while calmer lately, has yet to truly acknowledge the damage done. I'm torn between my desire to be there for Cullen and my need to protect my own well-being. The days pass, and the phone remains silent. Every now and then, I glance at it, half expecting her to call again. There's an ache in my chest, a mix of guilt and sadness. I know this story isn't over yet, but for now, all I can do is wait. To occupy my thoughts, I've been spending more time with my hobbies. The garden has become my sanctuary. It's where I reflect on the past few months, tending to the plants with the same care I once gave my grandchildren. The act of planting, watering, and pruning feels grounding, even healing. The quiet moments in the garden give me space to process my emotions without interruption. Occasionally, the older grandchildren visit, and the house becomes lively again. They've noticed the tension, and while they don't ask directly, I can see the questions in their eyes. Is Cullen coming back? One of them asked innocently last week. I changed the subject, unsure how to explain a situation even I don't fully understand. It breaks my heart to see them caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. My husband tries to mediate, urging me to reach out to my stepdaughter. "You're stronger than this," he says. "For Cullen's sake, let's find a way to move forward." But every time I consider it, I remember her boyfriend's words, his accusations, and the way he made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Forgiveness feels like an uphill battle I'm not ready to face. And then there's the financial aspect. My pension is solid, but the rising costs of maintaining the household weigh on my mind. Taking Cullen back would mean additional expenses and a return to the stressful routine I've worked so hard to leave behind. My husband argues that family is worth any sacrifice, but I've begun to question how much of myself I can give before there's nothing left. My daughter, ever the peacemaker, suggested a family meeting. "We need to clear the air," she said, but the thought of sitting across from my stepdaughter and her boyfriend fills me with dread. What would I say? Would they even listen? The wounds feel too fresh, the bridge too damaged to mend. Late at night, when the house is quiet, I write letters I never send. Letters to Cullen, explaining how much I love him and why I made the choices I did. Letters to my stepdaughter, asking for understanding and respect. Letters to myself, reminding me that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being. These letters remain tucked away in a drawer, but they bring me a small sense of relief, a way to articulate the emotions I can't seem to express out loud. As the weeks go by, I'm reminded that healing takes time. The story isn't finished, and maybe it never will be. For now, I'm learning to embrace the uncertainty, finding solace in the little things. A blooming flower in the garden, the laughter of my grandchildren, the quiet moments of reflection that help me move forward one day at a time. The days following the decision to step away from babysitting Cullen were a whirlwind of emotions. My mornings, once filled with the routine of preparing bottles and arranging toys, now felt empty. The quietness of the house was both a relief and an ache, a reminder of the absence of a little voice that had become a part of my life, despite the challenges that came with it. I tried to focus on the positives, the chance to reclaim my time, to invest in the hobbies and interests I had put on hold for so long. Yet there was a gnawing guilt that refused to be silenced. I wondered constantly if I had made the right choice, or if I had let my pride and frustration cloud my judgment. Cullen was innocent in all this, and the thought of him being shuffled from one caregiver to another weighed heavily on me. Meanwhile, family gatherings became strained. Thanksgiving came and went with an air of unease. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend chose not to attend, citing scheduling conflicts that everyone knew were an excuse. My husband and stepson tried to keep the conversation light, but their glances spoke volumes. My other grandchildren seemed to notice the tension, asking why Cullen wasn't there, and if he'd come for Christmas. I deflected their questions, not wanting to cast a shadow over the holiday. Christmas approached, and the usual joy of decorating the tree and baking cookies felt muted. My daughter, always perceptive, suggested we keep things small this year. "Let's focus on us," she said gently. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed her support until that moment. Despite the smaller celebration, Christmas morning was filled with laughter and the delighted squeals of children opening presents. Yet, amidst the joy, my thoughts drifted to Cullen. Was he having a good Christmas? Did he miss being here with his cousins? The uncertainty gnawed at me, making it hard to fully immerse myself in the festivities. As the new year began, I resolved to find clarity not just about the situation with Cullen, but about my role within the family. I started journaling daily, pouring my thoughts and emotions onto the pages in an attempt to untangle the web of feelings I couldn't quite articulate. Writing became a refuge, a way to process the anger, sadness, and guilt that had built up over months. Through journaling, I began to uncover patterns in my interactions with my stepdaughter and her boyfriend. Their need for control, my resistance to it, and the way our conflicts escalated all came into sharper focus. I realized that much of my frustration stemmed from feeling unappreciated and undervalued, despite the sacrifices I had made for their family. At the same time, I started to see glimpses of their perspective, their desire to protect their child and assert their independence as parents. While I didn't agree with their approach, understanding their motives brought a measure of peace. One day, as I was tending to my garden, my stepson stopped by unexpectedly. He lingered near the fence, watching as I pulled weeds and watered the flowers. "You're really good at that," he said after a long silence. His tone was hesitant, as if he were searching for the right words. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he continued. "I know it's been hard, for all of us." His admission caught me off guard. We hadn't spoken much since the tension began, and his willingness to acknowledge the strain felt like a breakthrough. "It has," I admitted, "but I'm trying to figure things out." "So am I," he replied. I want you to know that we all appreciate what you've done for Cullen, even if it didn't always seem like it." His words brought a lump to my throat. For the first time in months, I felt seen. We talked for a while longer, sharing memories and hopes for the future. While our conversation didn't resolve everything, it felt like a step in the right direction. As winter turned to spring, I began to focus on rebuilding connections with my family. I hosted small gatherings, inviting my children and grandchildren over for casual dinners and game nights. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend didn't attend, but I made sure they were invited, hoping they'd feel welcome when they were ready. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up after a family barbecue, my phone buzzed with a text from my stepdaughter. "Can we talk?" It read. My heart raced as I typed out a response. Of course. We met at a local coffee shop the next day. She looked tired, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, "about how we've handled things and how much we've asked of you." Her acknowledgement was unexpected, and I felt a flicker of hope. "It hasn't been easy for any of us," I said carefully, "but I'm glad you're here." Our conversation was a mix of apologies, explanations, and tentative plans for moving forward. While we didn't resolve everything, the willingness to communicate felt like progress. We left the coffee shop with a promise to keep the lines of communication open, a small but significant step toward healing. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes. My stepdaughter started reaching out more often, sending pictures of Cullen and updates about his milestones. Her boyfriend remained distant, but his absence from our interactions felt like a relief. Slowly, cautiously, I began to feel a sense of hope for our fractured relationship. Yet, the road ahead remained uncertain. I knew there would be more challenges to navigate, more difficult conversations to have, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of optimism, a belief that, despite the setbacks, our family could find its way back to one another. The journey wasn't over, but it was a beginning. The weeks following my conversation with my stepdaughter were a mix of cautious optimism and lingering tension. While the door to reconciliation had been cracked open, I could still feel the weight of unresolved emotions hanging heavily over our interactions. True to her word, she began sharing more updates about Cullen, sending photos and little anecdotes about his daily adventures. Seeing his smiling face again, even through a screen, brought a bittersweet mix of relief and longing. I tried to keep myself busy during this time, throwing myself into hobbies and projects I had long neglected. The garden continued to be my refuge, but I also began experimenting with new recipes in the kitchen and rediscovered my love for painting. The brush strokes across the canvas felt therapeutic, each movement a way to process the emotions I still struggled to voice. Family dynamics, however, remained complicated. My husband, though supportive, often brought up Cullen in quiet moments, nudging me to consider babysitting him again. "Just for a little while," he'd say, his tone gentle but insistent. "You're so good with him, and he needs you." But every time I entertained the idea, memories of the tension with our boyfriend came rushing back, pulling me back into the same cycle of doubt and frustration. Meanwhile, my stepson remained a quiet observer in all of this, though his presence was a steady reminder of the divided loyalties within our family. He'd stop by occasionally, often under the guise of needing help with something, but I knew he was checking in on me. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping iced tea, he said, "You've always been the glue that holds this family together. It's hard seeing things like this." His words stayed with me long after he left, a reminder of the delicate balance I'd tried so hard to maintain over the years. As spring turned to summer, the older grandchildren began spending more time at the house again. The laughter and energy they brought were a welcome distraction, but they also served as a stark contrast to Cullen's absence. The other kids occasionally asked about him, their innocent questions a painful reminder of the unresolved situation. I deflected as best as I could, focusing instead on creating new memories with them. We spent afternoons baking cookies, building forts in the living room, and running through sprinklers in the backyard. These moments were a balm for my aching heart, even as they highlighted the void Cullen's absence left behind. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my daughter pulled me aside. "Mom, have you thought about reaching out to Amanda again?" she asked, her voice cautious. I sighed, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I have, I admitted, but I don't know what else to say. We've talked, but things still feel so fragile. Maybe that's okay, she said. Sometimes things need time to heal, but you've always taught us that family is worth fighting for. Maybe this is one of those times. Her words lingered with me as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the decision of whether to take another step toward mending things. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few days later, Amanda called me out of the blue. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic, as she explained that her usual childcare arrangements had fallen through and she was in a bind. I hate to ask this, but could you watch Cullen for a few days until I figure something out? She asked. My heart raced as I considered her request. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from the potential for more hurt. But another part of me, the part that Miss Cullen terribly wanted to say yes. I can do that, I said finally, my voice steady but cautious. But we need to have some ground rules. I'm happy to help, but I can't go back to how things were before. Amanda agreed, and we spent the next hour discussing boundaries and expectations. By the time we hung up, I felt a cautious sense of hope that perhaps this time could be different. When Cullen arrived the next morning, my heart swelled at the sight of him. He had grown so much in the months since I'd last seen him, his chubby cheeks now framed by a mischievous grin. He ran to me without hesitation, wrapping his little arms around my legs in a hug that nearly brought me to tears. For the first time in a long time, the house felt whole again. The days that followed were a mix of joy and adjustment. Cullen quickly settled back into the routines we had once shared, and his laughter echoed through the house once more. But there were moments of tension too. As I navigated the new boundaries Amanda and I had set, she checked in frequently, her calls and texts sometimes feeling more like micromanagement than genuine concern. I reminded myself that rebuilding trust would take time, even as I struggled to balance my own needs with her expectations. Her boyfriend, however, remained conspicuously absent from our interactions. While his absence was a relief, it also left an unspoken tension hanging in the air. I couldn't help but wonder how he felt about Cullen being back in my care, and whether his silence was a sign of begrudging acceptance or simmering resentment. Despite these challenges, the days with Cullen were a reminder of why I had chosen this path in the first place. Watching him discover the world around him, his eyes lighting up with wonder at the simplest things, brought a joy that was hard to put into words. Whether we were reading stories on the porch swing, chasing butterflies in the garden, or building block towers in the living room, the moments we shared felt like little pockets of peace in an otherwise tumultuous time. As summer wore on, I found myself reflecting more and more on the complexities of family and forgiveness. The road to reconciliation was far from straightforward, but I began to see it less as a single destination and more as a journey, one that required patience, understanding, and a willingness to let go of past hurts. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But in those moments, I reminded myself of the laughter and love that had always been at the heart of our family, even amidst the struggles. The story was still unfolding, and I knew there were no guarantees of how it would end. But for now, I was grateful for the chance to hold Cullen close again, to be a part of his world in whatever way I could. And as I watched him play in the garden one sunny afternoon, his laughter ringing out like a song, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, we were on the path to something better. As summer turned into autumn, the cautious truce between Amanda and me began to solidify into something more stable. Our arrangement for Cullen's care was working, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a marked improvement from where we had been months ago. Slowly, we began to rebuild the trust that had been so deeply fractured. Amanda started dropping by in the afternoons when she came to pick Cullen up, lingering for a cup of tea or a quick chat. These moments, though brief, were an opportunity to reconnect. We didn't always talk about heavy things sometimes. We simply shared stories about Cullen's antics or laughed over old family memories. It was a reminder of the bond we once had and a glimpse of what could be again. Her boyfriend, however, remained a looming presence in the background. Though he didn't come to my house, his opinions filtered through Amanda. She'd mention his concerns or his reluctance to fully trust me with Cullen. While his absence was a relief, it also left an unresolved tension. I often wondered if he'd ever truly accept my role in Cullen's life, or if he'd always view me with suspicion. One day, Amanda surprised me by bringing him along to pick up Cullen. I saw his car pull into the driveway and felt my chest tighten. As he stepped out, he looked hesitant, almost uncomfortable, but he followed Amanda to the door. "Hi," he said stiffly when I opened it. His tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a start. We sat in the living room while Cullen played on the floor. The conversation was polite but guarded, neither of us quite willing to let our guard down. Eventually, Amanda excused herself to take a phone call, leaving the two of us alone. The silence was thick, and I scrambled to think of something to say. Finally, he spoke. I know we've had our differences, he began, his voice low, but I've seen how much Cullen loves being here, and I've realized that maybe I've been too quick to judge. His words caught me off guard. For months, I had assumed that we'd never see eye to eye, that the rift between us was irreparable. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the person behind the defensiveness, a father trying to do what he thought was best for his child, even if his methods had been misguided. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. I know we've had our struggles, but I've always cared about Cullen and wanted what's best for him. We talked for a while longer, cautiously navigating the minefield of past grievances and future hopes. By the time they left, I felt a tentative sense of progress, a small but meaningful step toward reconciliation. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere continued to improve. Amanda and her boyfriend began including me in more of Cullen's milestones, sending videos of his first words and inviting me to his small birthday party. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and I often felt like I was walking a tightrope, but it was progress. The turning point came during a family gathering in late November. It was the first time in over a year that we were all together under one roof. My husband and stepson had worked tirelessly to make it happen, and their efforts paid off. The house was filled with laughter and the aroma of Thanksgiving dinner, a stark contrast to the strained silences of the past. As we sat around the table, Amanda raised her glass. I just want to say thank you, she began, her voice steady but emotional. Thank you for being patient with me, for loving Cullen, and for giving us a chance to make things right. Her words brought tears to my eyes. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of my family. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but it had also been worth it. We weren't perfect, but we were together, and that was enough. In the months that followed, life began to settle into a new normal. Cullen continued to spend his days with me, and Amanda's visits became more frequent. Her boyfriend, though still somewhat reserved, made an effort to be more involved and respectful. The cracks in our relationships hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were no longer insurmountable. I also learned to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being. I said no when I needed to and made time for the hobbies and interests that brought me joy. The garden flourished, a testament to the healing that had taken place both inside and out. As I watched Cullen chase butterflies in the yard one sunny afternoon, I felt a deep sense of peace. The story of our family wasn't without its scars, but it was also filled with love, resilience, and hope. And as I held Cullen close that evening, his laughter ringing in my ears, I knew that we had found our way back to one another stronger, closer, and ready to face whatever came next.